It's time now for one more thing. So summer's finally here. And what better way to kick off summer than go swimming in the pool? Here's how one kid got started.
Oh, it's Greg.
Oh.
Jesse, why are you showing all these?
What do you mean?
It's
a
so
great
mean.
dad video.
No, it's not. He could be totally
He's fine. He's
Oh my
fine.
God. What if he
That's just so
Well, why are you showing it so many times over and over again?
Everything is
It's like your weird slapping video.
I just thought it's an amazing video. It's like the perfectly executed way to not flip off the board.
I mean, I could see Greg doing some video like that in poor taste, but you just
an animal.
I couldn't stop watching it. All right,
No one was hurt. All right, except for this video. Roll it. Greg's indifferent cat news. All right, let's just roll the tape here.
Oh,
Clearly disturbing tape. There is a dog excited. There's something going on. Maybe the house is on fire, but the cat is clearly indifferent. Or maybe he got tickets to a concert, a show. Cheap Trick's in town. He's saying, hey, I got tickets. Tickets come. And he probably the Uber's outside, and the Uber's going to leave, charge him, but the cat is still indifferent. And the guy, he called the car with his little paws.
That's like me when you're talking in the commercial break.
Oh my gosh. That's like you, Greg, outside my window.
You know I love a good podcast in the morning.
Yes.
And the new Fox News Rundown podcast is quite good. I've really liked it, and they let me participate. Tomorrow morning, you're going to hear an interview that I did with former federal judge Kevin Sharp. He was the lawyer that did the original review of the case of Matthew Charles, who is the person I've been talking about who had to return to prison because of a decision by the government that I think was the wrong one. He explains that, and also his decision to leave the bench and to help others who are in the same position as Matthew Charles.
6 a.m.?
Well, it airs at 6 a.m., but I mean, then you can download it over and over. That's how podcasts work, and I'll explain that to you
Set your alarm, Greg.
later.
I want to get it live at 6.
But you can tell Alexa to turn it on for you.
Yeah, do that. Alexa should spy in your house, Greg. Okay, so I have an excellent book recommendation that I started reading this weekend. Lincoln's Last Trial, the murder case that propelled him to the presidency. So as a former prosecutor, I find this book particularly fascinating. It's by Dan Abrams, who's ABC's chief legal analyst and founder of Mediaite, and also by David Fisher. The book tells the story of Lincoln's last murder trial, where he argued on behalf of a man who was claiming self-defense in an 1859 murder trial. It was a highly publicized case that served as one of the springboards for the presidency of Abraham Lincoln and his extraordinary political career. What's particularly interesting about it is it centers around the only transcript that's available that exists about Lincoln's legal careers that he argued.
All right.
Yeah, so you can get it on Amazon. Check it out.
Juan Williams.
Well, we're just about out of time, but I just want to say a lesson in human kindness. Hats off to Jamie Foxx, who attended an event for children of military families with special needs. Fox's sister has Down syndrome, and he was there to dance with the guests and says he'll do it every year.
Oh, that's nice.
All right, very nice. Greg is going to take this toss. Greg?
Fair and balanced is your dream. Make way.
Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Shannon Bream in for Bret Baier. We begin tonight with a hypothetical that is causing some very real concern about the president, the special counsel, and the Constitution. President Trump says he has the right to pardon himself should the Russia collusion probe make it necessary. But he says there will be no need since he's innocent and the whole thing is unconstitutional. That's where Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts off tonight. Good evening, John.
Shannon, good evening to you. A week from today, President Trump is set to sit down for a historic summit with the leader of North Korea. But even as he prepares for that meeting, the president still very much has the Russia investigation on his mind. President Trump began his 500th day in office by igniting a firestorm of legal and political debate, diving back into the Russia investigation in a breakfast tweet insisting, as has been stated by numerous legal scholars, I have the absolute right to pardon myself. But why would I do that when I have done nothing wrong? In a conference call with supporters this afternoon, President Trump doubled down on a morning tweet that the Mueller probe is totally unconstitutional.
It's a discredited disgrace. It's not even constitutional in a lot of people's opinion, in my opinion, too.
The pardon issue surfaced in a 20-page letter President Trump's outside counsel wrote to Robert Mueller in January. The letter, obtained by Fox News, laid out myriad reasons why Mueller has no legal standing to ask for an interview with the president. In one section, attorneys John Dowd and Jay Sekulow argue the president could, if he wished, terminate the inquiry or even exercise his power to pardon if he so desired. Democrats rush to say, oh, no, he couldn't.
It's not a rule of Trump. It's a rule of law that we live under in the United States of America. Even back in 1974, Richard Nixon's Justice Department made it quite clear that Nixon could not pardon himself. The same thing is true here.
President Trump's current outside counsel, Rudy Giuliani, says the president likely does have the power to pardon himself, though to do so would be political suicide.
The president of the United States pardoning himself would just be unthinkable, and it would lead to probably an immediate impeachment.
Press Secretary Sarah Sanders today added there's no reason for a pardon.
The president hasn't done anything wrong and therefore wouldn't need one.
The 20-page letter also reignited another controversy. What role did the president really play in drafting the initial statement from Donald Trump Jr. in response to that June 2016 meeting with a Russian attorney? 4 days after that statement was released, outside counsel Jay Sekulow said the president was not involved.
That was written by Donald Trump Jr. and I'm sure in consultation with his lawyer.
Later, the press secretary said he was involved, but only marginally.
He certainly didn't dictate, but, he, like I said, he weighed in, offered suggestion like any father would do.
But the January letter, written by Jay Sekulow, contradicts both those statements. It informs Mueller, you have received all of the notes, communications, and testimony indicating that the president dictated a short but accurate response to the New York Times article on behalf of his son, Donald Trump Jr. Giuliani believes Sekulow simply misspoke in the days after the initial statement was released.
I think Jay was wrong. I mean, this is the reason you don't let the president testify.
In the January letter, the president's attorneys argued that that statement was a private matter between the president and the New York Times, a private matter that Robert Mueller has no business sticking his nose into. Giuliani also added yesterday that he is leaning against having the president sit down with Robert Mueller. Shannon?
It's a bit of a whiplash. I can't keep track, but currently the suggestion is no. All right, John, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, the Supreme Court sides with a baker who refused to make a custom cake for a same-sex couple. But today's decision leaves a lot of unanswered questions.
Justice Kennedy has held that tolerance is a two-way street, and Jack Phillips was not tolerated by the Civil Rights Commission of Colorado.
We got your back, Jack!
The legal team for Colorado baker Jack Phillips is celebrating today after a 7-2 Supreme Court opinion holding that Phillips never got a fair shake when he was sued by a gay couple after declining to create a custom cake in celebration of their same-sex wedding. Writing for the majority, Justice Kennedy noted that at least one of the Colorado commissioners who heard the original complaint likened Phillips' explanation and religious beliefs to those who supported slavery and the Holocaust. Quote, this sentiment is inappropriate for a commission charged with the solemn responsibility of fair and neutral enforcement of Colorado's anti-discrimination law. Kennedy pointed out that a number of the commissioner's statements implied, quote, that religious beliefs and persons are less than fully welcome in Colorado's business community. But Kennedy himself noted that the broader legal issues in this dispute are far from settled and must be done so with tolerance for both sides, leaving LGBT advocates with mixed feelings.
We're certainly disappointed that the Supreme Court found in this narrow set of circumstances in favor of the baker. But what's important here is the Supreme Court in no way undermined our nation's civil rights laws.
The couple at the center of the case, Charlie Craig and Dave Mullins, say, quote, today's decision means our fight against discrimination and unfair treatment will continue. We will continue fighting until no one does. In Justice Ginsburg's dissent, joined by Justice Sotomayor, she found it irrelevant that Phillips sold cakes and cookies to gay and lesbian customers, despite the fact that he would not create custom wedding cakes for them, adding, quote, I see no reason why the comments of one or two commissioners should be taken to overcome Phillips' refusal to sell a wedding cake to Craig and Mullins. So both sides do agree that today's opinion does not settle the underlying issues. Later this week, the justices will privately consider whether or not to hear the case of a Washington state florist who declined when a longtime customer of hers asked her to do flowers for his same-sex ceremony. So let's talk about the legal arguments behind today's Supreme Court ruling and more. Senior political analyst Bret joins us live tonight. Good evening, Bret.
Hi, Shannon.
Your reaction to this ruling from the court?
Well, I think you're correct when you suggest that while it's not a narrow vote, it was 7-2, it is a rather narrow holding in the sense that it applies to an instance in which what the court really found was that this Baier didn't get a fair hearing, that the Colorado Civil Rights Commissioners were so biased against him, and indeed biased against the Baker's religious convictions. In fact, it belittled those convictions, in one case describing that argument as despicable, that it wasn't a fair hearing and therefore it couldn't stand. It does, however, I think, give some recognition to the idea that religious convictions may be a reason to deny services in certain circumstances. We don't know yet from this exactly what all those circumstances might be. Maybe the case of the florist will tell us more.
Yeah, but that probably should enlighten. If they decide to take it, they'll need 4 votes to do that on Thursday. Okay, to the other legal issues now, the president and whether or not he can pardon himself. The Constitution itself doesn't say anything about that, but he's getting a warning from one of his own top lawyers.
Well, he is. And Rudy Giuliani was saying yesterday, and what a lot of people got outraged by, the president had the authority to pardon himself, but it would be a disastrous step, would almost certainly lead to impeachment. And of course, he also pointed out that if he did pardon himself, pardons don't apply to impeachment. Mm-hmm. And the question of whether he could pardon himself remains an open question in the sense that the pardon power is pretty sweeping. And the president can exercise it pretty much as he sees fit. However, it has never been exercised that anybody knows of in a case where a person is pardoning, or a president is pardoning himself, and the Constitution is basically silent on that. There is a principle in law that we all kind of recognize, which is that no person shall be the judge of his or her own case. And this would seem to fly in the face of that. So it's a doubtful proposition that he could actually pardon himself.
It goes along with that advice that you shouldn't be your own lawyer either, or you have a fool for a client. So you can't be your own judge. You can't be your own lawyer by some estimations. But also there is this issue of this 1974 decision that came from within a legal opinion within the Department of Justice.
Well, this goes to the question of whether the president could be indicted by Robert Mueller. And in the Nixon era, and I guess 73 or 74, the Justice Department Office of Legal Counsel, which is the Justice Department's in-house attorney, determined that a president could not, a sitting president could not be indicted. That was looked at again in 2000 by the same Office of Legal Counsel. Obviously, different people came to the same conclusion. Justice Department legal opinions like that are not binding law. They are, however, binding on the department. And since Robert Mueller is a creature of that department, he's not an independent counsel, he's a special counsel working for the Justice Department, presumably those opinions would be binding upon him. That does not mean, however, that if the president was determined by the special counsel to have committed some crime that for which he could be impeached, he could then be indicted. So in other words, if he was found to have obstructed justice, impeached, once he's impeached, he's not in office anymore. That opinion doesn't apply anymore. He could be indicted, tried, convicted.
Yeah, to those on the left who are raising hue and cry this weekend saying he's an imperialist, he's going to do everything for himself, he's going to pardon himself, the Constitution wisely provides them that impeachment avenue.
The truth is that the argument is being made now that the president is declaring himself above the law. But impeachment is a core part of our law. And so long as he is vulnerable, susceptible to impeachment, subject to impeachment, he is certainly not above the law.
Yeah, and both he and his attorneys maintain this is a moot question. He won't need to pardon himself because he's done nothing wrong, and they're confident that that is what the special counsel is going to find.
I think the self-pardon is kind of a silly issue. I don't think it's going to happen, and it would be politically and could be calamitous politically for him to try it.
Yeah, and I think it was the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, who just moments ago said, "I would fire my lawyer if they advised me to pardon myself." So we'll see.
Good advice, probably good advice.
Bret, thank you for joining us.
You bet, Shannon.
All right, also today, the Supreme Court ruled in a case about a pregnant immigrant teen in the U.S. illegally who obtained an abortion with the help of the ACLU. Justices sided with the Trump administration, wiping away a lower court decision allowing her to have the procedure legally since the case was moot. But they rejected a suggestion her lawyers should be disciplined for getting her the abortion while the Trump administration was still working to appeal the case to the Supreme Court. Stocks were up today. The Dow gained 178. The S&P 500 finished ahead 12. NASDAQ jumped 52, finishing at a record high. Canada's threat to reciprocate on new U.S. import tariffs could even extend to something as benign as maple syrup. It is just the latest example of entrenchment between the U.S. and some of its top trading partners. Correspondent Kevin Corke has more tonight from the White House.
These tariffs, they're purely defensive in nature. They're designed basically to bring these industries back to life. And guess what? From day one, those tariffs were announced. They're working.
Working, say White House officials, to restore American commerce and enhance U.S. national security. Indeed, the president's Twitter feed has consistently assailed the, quote, unfairness of the tariffs, adding defiantly, by the time I finish trade talks, that will change. Massive trade deficits no longer. The United States has the world's largest trade deficit. It's been that way since 1975, with an $811.2 billion gap in 2017 alone. Nearly half of that, $375 billion, thanks to China. But from the United Kingdom to Beijing, from Ottawa to Mexico City, the tough talk on tariffs is sparking fears that a global trade war is imminent. Today, British Prime Minister Theresa May told President Trump in a phone call that U.S. tariffs on EU steel were unjustified and deeply disappointing. Mexico filed a complaint against the U.S. with the World Trade Organization. China warned that increased tariffs would force it to renege on a promise to reduce its trade surplus. And Canadian officials, stung by new fees on steel and aluminum due to national security concerns, have proposed $16 billion in retaliatory tariffs.
The idea that we are somehow a national security threat to the United States is quite frankly insulting and unacceptable.
Some experts think the president's strategy is well-intentioned, but goes a bit too far.
In some respects, the president is right, but the answer to that is not to throw up barriers on our side. It's to work to expand access abroad and lower tariffs across the globe.
House Speaker Paul Ryan's made no secret of his opposition to the new tariffs, while House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy says the president is merely standing up for free and fair trade. A contentious debate likely to get only hotter at the G7 later this week. Shannon?
Kevin Corke at the White House. Thank you, Kevin. Two of the top Republicans looking into reports of an FBI informant in the presidential campaign of President Trump appear to be at odds tonight. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge explains why. Good evening, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Shannon. In his Fox interview, the Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, responded to his colleague and fellow investigator Trey Gowdy, who said the FBI acted properly when at least one alleged confidential human source contacted Trump campaign aides. Congressman Gowdy, who was part of a classified Justice Department briefing on May 24th, emphasized President Trump told the former FBI director that if anyone connected with his campaign worked with Russia, the president wanted the FBI to investigate. Nunes said the comments did not indicate a split, but seemed to question his objectivity.
Now you have to remember that Mr. Gowdy loves the FBI and the Department of Justice. Even though Mr. Gowdy believes that the president's not a target of this investigation, his campaign is, and I think that's where the challenge occurs.
In the same interview, Nunes says he wants the FBI and Justice Department to finally release the confidential human source records so that conclusions can be reached based on data.
We've been waiting, almost a year now, we've been waiting for documents from the Deputy Attorney General. So Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein could provide all the documents, all the information that we need this week, and we could write a report.
Congressional investigators believe the records may finally be accessible Wednesday. The Justice Department had no immediate comment tonight on the timing, Shannon.
Catherine, any reaction from Congressman Gowdy?
Well, neither Congressman Gowdy nor his spokesperson returned calls and emails seeking comment. Gowdy's Government Oversight Committee and House Judiciary Committee are scheduled to meet in closed session tomorrow to quiz the FBI's espionage chief Bill Priestap, who was deeply involved in the Clinton email and Russia cases. His second in command was FBI agent Peter Strzok, who was removed from the Russia case for anti-Trump bias. The FBI's alleged use of at least one confidential human source will be a central line of questioning, Shannon.
All right, Catherine Herridge, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Former President George H.W. Bush has left a hospital in Maine after being treated for low blood pressure and fatigue. A Bush spokesman tweeted today that the president deeply appreciates the care and good wishes he has received. The 41st president is 93. His wife Barbara Bush died in April at age 92. They had been married for 73 years. Up next, Kim Jong-un cleans house ahead of next week's summit with President Trump. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 2 in Honolulu as a lava flow from the Kilauea volcano cuts off access to more neighborhoods on Hawaii's Big Island. The Hawaii County Civil Defense Agency says that vigorous lava eruptions are continuing in Leilani Estates and Lanipuna Gardens. Fox 31 in Denver as firefighters gain 10% containment on a wildfire in southwest Colorado. It's forced the evacuation of about 1,500 residents. The fire, about 10 miles north of Durango, has burned about 3.5 square miles of timber and brush. About 200 firefighters have been mobilized, and officials hope to have it contained by Tuesday. And this is a live look at Phoenix from Fox 10. The big story there tonight, police say a suspect in 4 Phoenix area homicides that happened in a 3-day period killed himself as SWAT officers entered his hotel room. Shots were fired as the SWAT team went into the suspect's room. Police say officers did not fire any of those shots. That is tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Israel says it plans to deduct from tax funds it collects for the Palestinians the amount needed to compensate Israelis living near the Gaza Strip who've come under a wave of arson attacks. Israel has been battling fires caused by kites rigged with incendiary devices launched by Palestinians in Gaza. The fires have damaged forests and torched agricultural fields. They've also disrupted daily life in communities near the Gaza Strip. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has fired 3 top generals. The move is seen as a possible move to quash dissent ahead of next week's summit with President Trump. Here's senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott.
There's a shakeup in North Korea's military brass just before the summit involving President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Now in place, a new head of defense, a new chief of general staff of the army, and a new director of the army's powerful political bureau. All more loyal to Kim, less conservative than their predecessors, and relatively younger, although still in their 60s.
This is a really positive outcome. It would suggest that Kim is positive about making real change, serious about making real change. And he's going to get rid of the people who disagree with that, and that shows that things could move forward.
This as planning for the Singapore summit picks up steam. Meeting again along the DMZ, diplomatic teams from the U.S. and North Korea. They're reportedly following up on last week's meeting involving North Korean Vice Chairman Kim Yong-chol and President Trump, trying to nail down a summit agenda. With no hard commitments yet regarding denuclearization, there are reports that South Korean President Moon, with President Trump and Kim, will declare an end to the Korean War. So far, there's just a truce in the decades-old conflict.
What's good about that is that at some point, those two armies that are facing each other on the DMZ could pull away from each other. And that would be very significant.
This, as the North Korean leader's diplomatic dance card might be filling up. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad reportedly wants to meet, and Russian President Putin is inviting Kim Jong-un to a regional summit. China, having had 2 summits with Kim, seems pleased to let the U.S. share multilateral engagement.
We hope the 2 sides will continue to enhance dialogue, improve ties, and play positive roles to advance denuclearization and political settlement on the peninsula.
White House spokesperson Sarah Huckabee Sanders said today that good progress is being made on summit preparations and that the start time is 9 a.m. Singapore time, June 12th. That's 9 p.m. Eastern time the day before. Mark it on your calendars. Shannon.
We have Greg Palcott. Thank you. Up next, why California's jungle primary may leave some Democrats on the outside looking in come November. First, beyond our borders tonight, rescuers are using heavy machinery and shovels to search for survivors or victims of an eruption of Guatemala's volcano of fire. Residents say they were caught unaware by fast-moving flows of lava and volcanic gas that have killed at least 62 people. The volcano west of Guatemala City exploded Sunday, sending towering clouds of ash miles into the air and hot flows of ash mixed with water and debris down its flanks, blocking roads and burning homes. A suicide bombing targeted a gathering of Afghanistan's top clerics today. Police say at least 7 people were killed and 9 wounded. Shortly before the attack struck, the clerics had issued a fatwa against suicide bombings and urged peace talks to end the Afghan war. Russian President Vladimir Putin is making security the top priority of the World Cup, which starts next week. There are new fan screening measures in place. Some seaports are closed and air traffic rules are tightened. The military will have an array of air defense missiles and other weapons ready, and squadrons of fighter jets to fend off any air attack. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. California's so-called jungle primary is tomorrow. And while the Golden State is generally viewed as Democratic territory, the primary format could actually work against the party's candidates in some places. Correspondent Peter Ducey explains tonight from Newport Beach.
Democrats think a blue wave is building, so the party wants to hang 10 tomorrow, trying to get top candidates on ballots in 10 GOP-held districts without a wipeout. All Democrats have to do to get on a ballot in the jungle primary system is finish first or second, but in some places there are so many Democrats running, support is split, and they may be left off November's ballot.
We've got 8 people on the ballot. The issue is the jungle primary in California, and what sounded like a great idea, right, just the top 2 vote getters move forward, is turned into all sorts of gamemanship.
If Harley Ruda finishes third, there may not be any Democratic challenger for Republican Congressman Dana Rohrabacher. Scott Baugh, a Republican, could be the runner-up, something he says would have Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi panicking.
The more seats you take off the table, the more she has to run every campaign perfectly, and we know in campaigns that's not happening, especially when it doesn't look like there's a blue wave. It's turning into a bit of a blue trickle or a blue drought or something.
In the 45th District, Democrats hoping to challenge Congresswoman Mimi Walters are making their primary about her vote for the tax reform bill.
One thing they tell you as a Republican in Orange County is never raise taxes, and one of the things she's done is voted to raise taxes on all her constituents.
Walters disputes any liability for her tax vote.
People have more money in their pocket because of tax reform. People are feeling good about the direction of our country, and they're happy.
Further south towards San Diego, Democrats are trying to take advantage of a climate that was so unfavorable to Republicans. Longtime incumbent Congressman Darrell Issa retired.
We care very deeply about clean air and clean water, clean beach, getting the nuclear waste off our coast. Darrell Issa has been our member of Congress for 17 years. He hasn't solved the problem.
But Republicans believe they can keep the Issa seat with a platform promoting problems with high taxes and sanctuary state policies.
They're not going to take California. There's no way. Right, guys?
One of the Democrats trying to avoid being locked out of the primary, Harley Ruda, is about to start door knocking nearby for last-minute support as the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee watches from Washington to see if its $1.8 million investment here was good enough just for a spot on the ballot. Shannon?
All right, Peter Ducey tracking those primaries, and we'll be with you again live tomorrow night for your coverage. Thank you, Peter. More problems tonight for embattled EPA Chief Scott Pruitt. This time, he's accused of having a top aide perform personal chores, including the pursuit of a used mattress from the Trump International Hotel. The incidents are revealed in a letter from House Democrats to Oversight Committee Chairman Trey Gowdy. Pruitt's already under scrutiny for several other unusual requests and possible ethics violations. Former President Bill Clinton says he was right to not resign following the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and that present-day critics are living in a different context. Clinton is promoting a new book and is facing some tough questions in the Me Too era. Correspondent Kristen Fisher takes a look.
I think I did the right thing. I defended the Constitution.
In a testy interview on NBC News, a defiant former President Bill Clinton refused to accept any more responsibility for his affair with Monica Lewinsky.
Looking back on what happened then, through the lens of Me Too now, do you think differently or feel more responsibility?
No, I felt terrible then, and I came to grips with it.
Did you ever apologize to it?
No, yes, and nobody believes that I got out of that for free. I left the White House $16 million in debt.
A few hours after the interview aired, Lewinsky responded saying she's grateful to the myriad people who have helped me evolve plus gain perspective in the past 20 years.
Monica up top. Straight ahead, Monica.
She then shared a link to her op-ed in Vanity Fair from 3 months ago in which she said, quote, "He was my boss. He was the most powerful man on the planet. He was 27 years my senior with enough life experience to know better. He was, at the time, at the pinnacle of his career, while I was at my first job out of college."
Do you feel like you owe her an apology?
No, I do. I do not. I've never talked to her. But I did say publicly on more than one occasion that I was sorry.
Clinton's comments are now being criticized by the left.
This is one of the key reasons why we have Trump today.
Even longtime Clinton friend and mega fundraiser, the former governor of Virginia, Terry McAuliffe, didn't think that apology was enough.
I wish he'd said today that he'd said many times, I apologize. Publicly he apologized. Felt horrible for the actions that he did. and moved on.
The Democratic Party was already moving away from being the party of the Clintons, but the former president was still a popular surrogate heading into the midterms. Now several Democratic strategists say those candidates may no longer want his public support.
They certainly won't be inviting them on the campaign trail. Maybe they'll still be happy to help them come raise money for them behind closed doors.
And sexual harassment is a huge issue for Democratic voters heading into the midterms. According to a CNN poll last month, 80% of Democrats described it as extremely or very important to them. Shannon?
Kristen Fisher, thank you very much. Former Defense Secretary, National Security Advisor, and number 2 at the CIA, Frank Carlucci, has died. Carlucci served 4 U.S. presidents in a variety of roles. He was perhaps best known as the Pentagon chief who supported President Ronald Reagan's so-called Star Wars defense effort, which many people believe hastened the end of the Cold War. Media reports say Carlucci died Sunday at his Virginia home. Frank Carlucci was 87.
Almost impractical. You know, he's the guy, the president of the United States, pardoning himself would just be unthinkable, and it would lead to probably an immediate impeachment. You know, you get the House, Senate would be under tremendous pressure. President Trump has no need to do that. He didn't do anything wrong.
Thankfully, the president hasn't done anything wrong and wouldn't have any need for a pardon.
All right, let's talk about it with our panel. Matt Schlapp, contributor with The Hill, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor at Real Clear Politics, and Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com. Welcome to all of you.
Hey, Shannon.
Okay, so the president has tweeted a lot, as he always does, and he says, listen, I've been told by numerous legal scholars I have the absolute right to pardon myself, but why would I do that when I've done nothing wrong? Matt?
Yeah, this is basically all what they call the political question. You're the lawyer, I'm not. But the idea that we'd even be in a place where the president would be pardoning himself, and maybe it goes to the nation's highest court. I think what the president is really trying to say is that there are a lot of constitutional questions about everything that's happened in this whole controversy, including spying on the executive branch, spying on members of the opposing campaign. Lots of questions here. And he's saying, I'm going to fight fire with fire. You're doing things that I view as extra constitutional, including having a special counsel that's acting more like a Senate confirmed actor in the Department of Justice, and he's saying I'm going to fight it with the powers I have as well.
All right, I want to play a little bit of what Senator Ed Markey had to say about this. Here's his take.
It's not a rule of Trump, it's a rule of law that we live under in the United States of America. Even back in 1974, Richard Nixon's Justice Department made it quite clear that Nixon could not pardon himself. The same thing is true here.
Okay, and AB, he's referring to a memo that was written by then Acting Assistant Attorney General Mary Lawton, who said under the fundamental rule that no one can be a judge in his own case, the president cannot pardon himself. 1974.
Right. Nixon hoped that it would be possible, but it wasn't. This is a really, remember, we're in the middle of a spin war, of a political campaign that Rudy Giuliani is waging in the press on behalf of Donald Trump at his request to spin things a certain way so as to form the opinions among Trump supporters and others and congressional Republicans who are supine and completely acquiescent at this point.
But they disagree on some of these points. They're not in lockstep.
I don't hear anyone today fighting the pardon thing. Ted Cruz, as Guy and I were just discussing, went silent for 18 seconds when asked if it was constitutional for the president to fire himself. And he, having boasted that he memorized the Constitution, to pardon himself, I'm sorry.
Chuck Grassley and Lindsey Graham have pushed back.
They did not push back. They said, wow, if that was my lawyer, I'd get a new one.
Well, that sounds like a pushback.
It was not. We are here taking an oath to the Constitution and not the man. He is not allowed to do this. These are nearly dictatorial powers he's describing in that 20-page memo and in his tweets this morning, and that is out of line. No one pushed back that hard. They called it a distraction. Bob Corker wondered why he talks this way, which takes away from the subjects of the day. Shannon, let's get back to the fact that the Trump team completely lied about the Trump Tower meeting description that the president gave when he dictated a false statement. They know Bob Mueller has that. They They know that Mark Corallo, who was on the Trump legal team, temporarily left because he believed a cover-up was in the hatching, and he has testified to Mueller about that.
Okay,
they know Josh Rafael.
Let's stop and break some of this down.
And Hope Hicks
let's stop and break some of this down.
That was crafted.
Because this is one of the things that Rudy Giuliani said about why he doesn't want the president to testify, because he says if you remember things differently, if the accounts change, that creates a lot of problem. Even if there is an innocent explanation for everything about who dictated the letter, what input the president had, it seems the story has changed. But Giuliani says, no, Jay got this wrong, but this is why I don't want them interviewing the president.
Well, the story has absolutely changed, and they said, no, it didn't happen. And now in the letter that they sent, I guess in January, they admit that it did. That's not good. That hurts their credibility. There's no question about that. To me, as I look back and I'm looking at these clips and watching them from Rudy on the Sunday shows and the tweet from the president, sort of gaming out self-pardons, I'm sitting here thinking, what on earth are we doing here? Why are we listening to the president and his team speculate in real time about whether he might do something that they then hasten to add, oh, he'll never have to do it? To me, it's an obvious, that's a crazy hypothetical. It would never come to that. Next question, no comment. But instead, Trump doubles down and says, you bet I can do it, which is why we're all sitting here debating the finer points of whether or not the president could hypothetically get to that point. Why?
But Matt, again, he says there's no need for it. But he wants to be on the record saying that I believe, because of what legal scholars have told me, I would be right to do this.
Yeah, I think there's a hinge here. There's a question about what are the president's limits of his pardon power. But there's also this whole question about whether a president can be indicted. And I think what the founders and the writers of our Constitution envisioned is that a politician, the head of our government, the President of the United States, chief executive, the best way to handle these questions is the impeachment process through the House and with conviction in the Senate. And all these questions about whether the president could be indicted, it hinges on this question of pardons, and it also hinges on this final question. This is really important. We have Bob Mueller acting much more like a Senate-confirmed officer of the Constitution and not like somebody who was picked to do a discrete task. And that's the real question here. Is Bob Mueller being managed? Is he able to pull people onto his team at his discretion? If that's the case, he should be confirmed by the Senate. That's a substantial constitutional question that we're not talking about.
All right, AB, use the word dictatorial, which you know that's going to upset a lot of people when they talk about this. But the fact is,
nearly dictatorial.
Okay, nearly dictatorial. It's qualified. But the Constitution does have, as Matt talked about, this framework for impeachment. So if there are enough people convinced that this president is out of line, whether he's committed a crime or not, whether he's pardoned himself or not, they still have a means. He's not limitless in his power. There's still a way to rein him in if the lawmakers are convinced that's necessary.
But between the memo and his tweets, he's basically saying, I can terminate this at any time. I can't be indicted. I can pardon myself. He used the words absolute right. And he is presenting himself as above this investigation, let alone the laws that confine it. They are preparing, and we've talked about this at this table for months now. Rudy Giuliani is preparing a political campaign in order to basically saying he can't be indicted, he can only be impeached. But what they're doing with the reason I raised the Trump Tower meeting and the statement about it is because they know that Mueller perceives it to be an obstruction of justice, and it's likely to be presented in the report that way. So the letter from January with those assertions is designed to say, but you can't even really assess it as an obstruction of justice because he can't obstruct the law. And so what he's saying to congressional Republicans is you can't even impeach him for obstruction of justice. Because he can't obstruct justice.
Let me bring you into this because
impeachment's a political question.
That's exactly right.
But it's not like yesterday that people decided that there had to be a PR component to the political fights that they're waging here in D.C. That's as old as time.
Correct. And
part of it.
I would also note that we're all sort of analyzing in granular detail the contents of this letter, this 20-page letter that went out in January. Almost that entire legal team is gone now. Mm-hmm. So you could argue that some of the assertions that they made in there are obsolete at this point, which is why I'm still baffled why Rudy and others would even indulge this conversation about self-pardons. That is a distraction right now. It's getting way ahead of anything, and yet they sort of threw that chum in the water, or at least responded to the bait from the press, and then Trump doubled down. I just don't think that does him much of a service here.
Well, we will see. There's an Inspector General report due out any day. We've got the Mueller investigation and many others, congressional bodies, and yet the president hasn't fired any of these folks yet. So we will see. Next up, the Supreme Court rules on the baker who refused to make a custom cake for a same-sex wedding.
This is a one-off decision that only affects the baker in this particular case and has no bearing on how our nation's civil rights laws are implemented.
There are certain principles here that will be applied to many other cases. When the court said that religious people have the right to be fully robust members of the economic community, that's a principle that has application in many contexts.
All right, we are back with our panel today to talk about this opinion from the Supreme Court saying this Christian baker in Colorado, essentially Justice Kennedy in the 7-3 opinion writing that this was about the original commission that heard this man's case. And he pointed out things that they'd said, equating his religious claims to people who supported slavery, to Nazis. He said, this guy never got a fair shake. But Guy, it doesn't sound like my reading of this, that we got to the underlying issues, the full merits of these cases.
That's right. I think the court sidestepped it, which is why you got 7 justices, including 2 liberal justices, to go along with it, with Kennedy actually authoring the decision. There was not a precedent set, a big precedent set on the actual, as you say, underlying question of where these tensions lie and how they get resolved when gay rights and religious liberty collide in the case of a small business owner declining to participate or lend their artistic skills or speech or expression to a same-sex wedding ceremony or something equivalent to it. I'm curious to see how that will eventually be resolved, perhaps in a later case. But for now, this was a slapdown by 7 justices of the Human Rights Commission, or the Civil Rights Commission in Colorado, and the bureaucrats that make up that tribunal, who were openly hostile to Orthodox Christian teachings and tradition. And the justices said this was open bias, and therefore they sided with the baker. So I would say a significant but relatively narrow and constrained victory for religious liberty.
Yeah, it's important to remember, too, that when this happened in Colorado, it was not yet legal to